I want you to look at something with me. This is a piece of footage, 17 seconds long. 17 seconds of ordinary dashcam video that an insurance company told me didn't exist, that their own adjuster told me, and I quote, wouldn't change the outcome of this claim. By the end of this video, you're going to watch their entire story collapse. But before we get there, I need to take you back 47 days. 47 days in which I was ignored, lied to, threatened with legal action by the people who were supposed to protect me, and left with a destroyed truck, a stack of medical bills, and the suffocating feeling that the system I'd been faithfully paying into for 22 years had just decided, calmly, professionally, without a second thought, that I didn't matter. My name is Gary Malone. I'm 53 years old. I drive a truck. I coach youth baseball on weekends. I've never been in serious trouble a day in my life, and I almost let them get away with it. Stay with me. Let me paint you a picture of October 14th, because I want you to understand what normal feels like before it disappears. I live in Greensboro, North Carolina. Not the glamorous part. Nobody's filming movies in my neighborhood. I live on a quiet street off Battleground Avenue in a 2-story house I bought in 2009 with my wife, Denise. We've got a golden retriever named Buck, who destroys every garden hose we've ever owned, a daughter in her second year at UNC Wilmington, and a son who just started high school and thinks his dad is approximately the least cool person on the planet Earth. I work in commercial HVAC installation. I've worked for the same company for 16 years. I get up at 5:15 every morning, I pack my lunch, I drive my truck to the job site, and I come home. That truck, a 2019 GMC Sierra, dark navy blue, extended cab. I want to talk about that truck for a second, because people who don't drive trucks for a living might not understand the relationship. That truck had 74,000 miles on it. Every single one of those miles was mine. I knew every rattle and squeak. I knew how she handled in rain, in ice, how she responded when you gunned it on the on-ramp. I kept her maintained like she was a member of the family. New tires every 40,000 miles. Oil change every 5,000. I had the bedliner redone in 2022 because the original was starting to bubble. My father drove trucks. His father drove trucks. I know that sounds sentimental. It's just a vehicle. I understand that. But there's something about a working man and his truck that I don't think needs a lot of explaining to most people watching this. That truck was mine. I earned it. October 14th was a Thursday. We had finished up a big commercial job at a distribution center off I-85. 12-hour day, good crew, solid work. I was tired, but the good kind of tired. Denise had texted me around 6 asking if I wanted chicken or pasta. I said chicken. She sent back a thumbs up and a little chef emoji. I pulled out of the job site at 7:22 p.m. The Dashcam, a Garmin Dashcam 67W, which I'd installed myself about 8 months earlier because Denise had been telling me to get one for years and I'd finally stopped arguing, came on automatically when the engine started. GPS timestamp, wide-angle lens. It recorded everything. Everything. I took my usual route home, down Industrial Boulevard, left on Lee Street, then north on Elm. I'd driven that route probably 1,000 times. I had the radio on low, some sports talk, and I was thinking about dinner and whether my son had finished his history project. It was an ordinary Thursday evening in Greensboro, North Carolina. And then, At the intersection of Elm Street and Friendly Avenue, everything in my life split into two halves, before and after. I need you to understand how fast it happens. People who haven't been in a serious accident, not a fender bender, I mean a real crash, they have this idea that there's time. Time to react. Time to think. Time to do something heroic, or at least intelligent. There is no time. I was traveling north on Elm Street. The light at Friendly Avenue was green, had been green for several seconds when I entered the intersection. I was going approximately 34 miles per hour in a 35-mile-per-hour zone. I know this, not because I checked my speedometer at that exact moment, but because the Dashcam's GPS module records speed data continuously. 34 miles per hour. Not speeding, not aggressive, just going home. From my left, westbound on Friendly Avenue, a 2021 Dodge Charger came through the intersection at what investigators would later estimate was 58 miles per hour. He ran a red light. Not yellow, not arguably yellow, not one of those situations where you can play games with timing. The light had been red on Friendly Avenue for approximately 4 seconds before he entered that intersection. 4 seconds. I want you to think about that. By the time he entered that intersection against a red light, my green light had been active long enough that I was well through the intersection. There was no reasonable argument, none, that this was my fault. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The impact happened on the driver's side rear quarter panel. He clipped me at an angle. What accident reconstructionists call an offset frontal impact from the striking vehicle's perspective, and the physics of it sent my Sierra into a full rotation. 1.5 turns. I ended up facing south, back the way I came, against the curb on the east side of Elm Street. The airbags did not deploy, which sounds like a good thing until you understand that the force distribution in a spinning impact doesn't always hit the sensors the right way. What it means in practical terms is that my body was an unrestrained object in a vehicle spinning at speed with nothing to catch it. My shoulder hit the door frame, my head hit the side window, the seatbelt locked, and the load on my chest left a bruise that a nurse at the hospital would describe as striking. I remember the sound most. People talk about the visual, the other car, the glass, the crumple. For me, it was sound, the screech of his tires in the half second before impact. The bang, not the movie version, not a Hollywood explosion, but a dense, percussive, almost mechanical bang, and then the grinding shriek of sheet metal on pavement as my truck came to rest. And then silence. My first conscious thought was, I left the radio on. The sports talk was still going. Some analyst's voice, perfectly calm, discussing a quarterback's completion percentage, and I'm sitting there in my destroyed truck, facing the wrong direction on Elm Street, trying to figure out if my arms work. They did. Mostly. I got the door open, it fought me, the frame had talked, and I stepped out onto Elm Street. Both legs. Good. I put my hand on the roof of the truck to steady myself, and I looked at the damage for the first time. The driver's side rear quarter was gone. The bed had folded at the wheel well. The rear axle was visibly out of alignment. You could see it just standing there. The left rear wheel canted outward like a broken leg. Glass from the rear driver's side window was spread across 20 feet of pavement. I had an odd, dissociated thought. I remember thinking, she's not going to make it. The Charger had come to rest about 40 feet west, up against a fire hydrant he'd apparently clipped on the way. The front end was destroyed. Steam was coming from under the hood. The driver, I would later learn his name, was Marcus Del Rey Webb, 26 years old, with a previous speeding citation from 2021, was standing outside his car, on his phone, already talking to someone. He wasn't checking on me. He wasn't looking at the intersection. He was on his phone, gesturing, and in the ambient light of the street lamps, I could see him nodding. I would think about that image many times over the next 47 days. He was already working on his story. The first police unit arrived in approximately 4 minutes. Officer Tanya Rivers, GPD. She was professional, calm, and she immediately began separating witnesses. There were 3 people who had seen the accident from the adjacent parking lot of a Walgreens, a woman who'd been loading groceries, a man who'd been walking to his car, and a teenager who'd been sitting on the curb, eating something. Officer Rivers took all 3 aside. I sat on the curb, and an EMT checked my shoulder and my head. Possible concussion, they said. We need to take you in. I said, give me a minute. I looked back at my truck, parked at that wrong angle, glass everywhere, and I thought about Denise's chicken dinner, sitting on the stove, getting cold. I called her from the curb. I told her I'd been in an accident. I told her I was okay. I heard her voice change. That specific change that spouses make, that isn't panic, but is the controlled version of panic. And I told her the intersection and said, don't rush, I'm fine. Come when you can. When I ended the call, I noticed something. The dash cam. It was still on the windshield. The little indicator light was still green. The impact had knocked it slightly sideways, but it was still mounted. And I remember thinking, and this turned out to be the most important thought I had that entire night. I remember thinking, that thing was running. I reached in through the broken window. Carefully, there was still glass on the sill, and I ejected the SD card. I put it in my shirt pocket. I zipped the pocket shut. That SD card, roughly the size of my thumbnail, contained the 17 seconds that would eventually change everything. I just didn't know it yet, because what happened next made me think for a moment that maybe it wouldn't matter. Officer Rivers came over to take my statement. I told her exactly what happened. Green light, northbound on Elm. Impact from the left. I was clear and specific, and I had nothing to hide because I had done nothing wrong. Then she told me what Marcus Webb had told her. He said, I ran the red light. He said I ran the red light. He said he had the green on Friendly Avenue. He said he had slowed down, when he saw me coming. He said he tried to brake, but it was too late. He said he thought the light was going to change, and then this truck just came flying through. I looked at Officer Rivers, and I said, as calmly as I could manage, that is not what happened. She said, I understand, sir. That's why we have the investigation process. I said, the light was green. I have dashcam footage. She wrote something in her notebook. She didn't seem particularly moved. I didn't know it yet, but Marcus Webb had said the same thing. That his girlfriend in the passenger seat was his dashcam, essentially, because she'd been with him and had seen the whole thing. Conflicting accounts. 2 vehicles, 1 intersection, 1 SD card in my shirt pocket. And I was about to spend the next 3 weeks discovering just how little that would initially seem to matter. The hospital kept me for about 4 hours. Mild concussion, bruised ribs, soft tissue injury in the right shoulder. They gave me a neck brace to wear for a few days. some anti-inflammatories, and a discharge summary that I would come to consider one of the most important documents in my possession. Denise picked me up at 11:30. She'd had her sister come stay with the kids. She didn't say a lot in the car. Denise is a quieter person than me, always has been. She processes internally. But she reached over at a red light and put her hand on mine. And I thought, okay, this is going to be hard, but I'm going to be okay. I was right about the first part. The next morning, I called my insurance company, State Coverage Group. I'd been with them for 16 years. I had full coverage, comprehensive, collision, uninsured motorist. I was paying $187 a month. I had never missed a payment. I had one prior claim in 16 years, a windshield replacement in 2018. The first person I spoke to was a claims representative named Donna. She was polite, took my information, opened a claim, gave me a reference number. So far, so normal. She told me an adjuster would be in contact within 3 to 5 business days. I also called the at-fault drivers insurance, Mid-State Auto Insurance, a company I'd never dealt with before. They took my information as a third-party claimant, told me the same thing, 3 to 5 business days. Day 3, no call. Day 5, no call. On day 6, I called my company back. Donna connected me to my assigned adjuster. His name was Craig Hooper. Craig Hooper. I want to describe Craig Hooper carefully because I think a lot of you have met a Craig Hooper at some point in your life and you'll recognize him immediately. Craig had the smooth, slightly bored voice of a man who has had 10,000 conversations exactly like this one and has never once been surprised by any of them. He spoke in complete sentences. He used words like pursuant and at this juncture in regular conversation. He was helpful in the same way that a form letter is helpful, technically responsive, entirely empty. He told me the investigation was ongoing. He told me they were working to establish liability. He told me they had received conflicting accounts from the other party. I said I had dashcam footage. He said, and I remember this word for word, "We're aware that you've indicated you may have footage. At this juncture, our investigation is proceeding through standard channels. May have footage." I had the SD card in my hand when he said that. I was sitting at my kitchen table, SD card right there. I said, I have the footage, I can submit it right now. How do I get it to you? He gave me an email address. I sent the footage that afternoon, a clear, time-stamped, GPS-embedded video file showing the intersection, the green light, my speed, and the moment of impact from a slightly forward angle that nonetheless clearly captured the light status and the approach of the charger. I sent it at 2:47 p.m. I have the sent receipt. I heard nothing for 11 days. 11 days, during which my truck sat at a tow yard accumulating daily storage fees, during which I was driving a rental car that I was paying for out of pocket because the rental coverage dispute was pending liability determination, during which my shoulder hurt every morning and I was missing 2, sometimes 3 hours of work per week for physical therapy appointments, during which I received the first of what would eventually be 4 collection calls about the tow yard storage fees. On day 11, I called Craig Hooper. He didn't answer. I left a message. He called back 2 days later, day 13. He told me they had reviewed the footage I submitted and that it did not, in their assessment, conclusively establish the signal status at the time of the collision. He said the camera angle and image quality created interpretive ambiguity. He said the investigation remained ongoing. I sat very still for about 10 seconds after he said that. Then I asked him to explain to me what he meant by interpretive ambiguity. He said the footage showed what appeared to be a green signal for my direction of travel, but that given the camera angle, the signal for the cross-street traffic could not be independently verified from the footage alone. I said, "Craig, the footage shows I had a green light. Are you suggesting that two intersections can simultaneously display green in opposing directions?" He said that wasn't what he was suggesting, but that the footage alone was insufficient to close the liability question. I said, "What else do you need?" He said they were waiting on the police report and the statements from witnesses. The police report had been filed 8 days ago. I had a copy. I asked if he'd seen it. He said they were in the process of obtaining it. 13 days after my accident, and my own insurance company's adjuster had not yet obtained the police report. That was the moment, right there, on that phone call, that I understood something important. They were not investigating this claim. They were managing it, managing me, waiting, hoping I'd get tired, get confused, accept a lowball settlement on the vehicle, and go away quietly. That was the business model. And they were about to find out I wasn't that kind of person. The official denial letter arrived on day 19. It came from Mid-State Auto Insurance, the at-fault driver's company, not my own, which actually matters because third-party claims operate under different rules. Mid-State's letter was 3 pages of dense legal language that essentially communicated one thing. They believed their insured, Marcus Webb, was not at fault for the accident, and therefore they were declining my claim for property damage and personal injury. The reasoning they offered was this: based on their investigation, including a statement from their insured and a statement from a passenger in the vehicle, they had determined that Marcus Webb had entered the intersection on a green light and that I had been the driver who failed to yield. His girlfriend, the passenger. That was their evidence. His girlfriend, who had every conceivable reason in the world to support his story, versus my dashcam footage and 3 independent witnesses. I read that letter at the kitchen table 3 times. The third time, I noticed my hands were shaking slightly, not from fear, from something colder than fear, from the recognition that I was being lied to professionally in writing by people who did this for a living. I called my own insurance company. Craig Hooper wasn't available. I spoke to his supervisor, a woman named Patricia Marsh. I explained the situation. I explained that I'd submitted dashcam footage, that there were 3 witnesses, that the police report, which I now had a full copy of, and which noted apparent signal violation by Vehicle 2, meaning Webb's Charger, supported my account. Patricia Marsh was sympathetic in exactly the same way Craig Hooper was helpful, technically engaged, fundamentally empty. She said they were continuing to work on my behalf. She said these situations sometimes required additional time to resolve. She said I should not panic. I told her I wasn't panicking. I told her I was asking for a specific timeline. She said she couldn't provide one. I said, "My truck has been at a tow yard for 19 days. The fees are now $1,400. I am being told I am responsible for an accident I did not cause. I have footage, I have witnesses, I have a police report. What exactly is taking additional time?" She put me on hold for 4 minutes. When she came back, she said, They would have an update for me within 5 to 7 business days. Day 19. I hung up and I sat at that kitchen table for a long time. My son came downstairs to get a glass of water. He was in his pajamas, hair messed up. He's 14, that age where dads aren't cool, but you can still catch him wanting to ask you things. He looked at me at the table and said, "You okay, Dad?" I said, "Yeah, bud, just some paperwork." He looked at me for a moment like he wasn't totally buying it. Then he said, "Is it about the truck?" I said, "Don't worry about it." He nodded and went back upstairs. And I thought, I cannot let this be the lesson he learns. I cannot let him watch his father get eaten by this machine and do nothing. The next morning, I started making different calls. Here's what they count on. I want to be very direct about this because I think a lot of people watching this either have been in this situation or will be, and I want you to understand the strategy they're running. When an insurance company denies or delays a claim, they are not just saving money on that specific claim. They are gambling on human psychology. They know that a certain percentage of people, maybe 40, maybe 50%, will eventually give up. The bills will pile up. The stress will accumulate. The emotional exhaustion of fighting a corporation that has unlimited time and a dedicated legal department and a team of adjusters who do nothing but this every day for years, that exhaustion becomes its own kind of weapon. They did the math a long time ago. It is cheaper to deny legitimate claims and pay the ones that fight through than it is to just pay the legitimate claims. That is not a conspiracy theory. That is the documented, actuarially driven business logic of modern insurance claims management. By day 25, my situation looked like this. Tow and storage fees, $1,860. Rental car out of pocket, $740. Physical therapy co-pays, $380. Lost wages for PT appointments, approximately $600. Total out-of-pocket for an accident I did not cause, just under $3,600. The truck itself, my Sierra, had been declared a total loss by my insurance company, which meant they were moving to a settlement offer on the vehicle. Craig Hooper, on day 23, had called to inform me with the warmth of a parking meter that they were valuing my truck at $22,400. I had researched this extensively by that point. Comparable 2019 GMC Sierras in my region, my mileage, my trim level, they were selling for $27,500 to $29,000. I had printed out the listings. I had the numbers. I pushed back, and Craig told me their valuation was based on a proprietary database, and that I was welcome to submit a counter-valuation within 14 days. $22,000 for a truck worth at minimum $27,000, on top of $3,000 in unreimbursed expenses. For an accident, that wasn't my fault. And here's the part that I think people don't talk about enough, the part that doesn't show up in the dollar figures. The sleep. I was not sleeping. I would lie awake at 2 in the morning, doing math, running scenarios, wondering if I should just accept whatever they offered and be done with it, wondering what would happen if I didn't, wondering how I was going to explain to my daughter, who needed us to make her spring semester payment in January, that I might be a few $1,000s short because an insurance company decided that a 26-year-old who ran a red light at 58 miles per hour was probably my fault. Denise saw it. She didn't say a lot, again, that's who she is, but she started leaving cups of tea on my desk when I was up late. One night she sat down next to me and looked at my notes. I had a whole legal pad of notes at this point, and she said, "Are we going to be okay?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Are you sure?" I looked at that legal pad. The phone records, the email timestamps, the insurance denial letter, the police report, the SD card in its little case that I'd been carrying around in my shirt pocket for 3 weeks like a talisman. I said, "I'm sure, but I'm going to need a lawyer." Before I got the lawyer, this is important, I went back to the dashcam footage. I had watched it maybe a dozen times by this point, but I'd been watching it for the obvious stuff. The green light, the speed data, the timestamp. I'd been watching it the way a person watches something when they're trying to prove a simple thing. On day 28, I decided to watch it differently. I sat down with my laptop. I pulled up the file. I watched it at full speed, then at half speed. Then I went frame by frame through a section I'd mostly glossed over. The approach to the intersection, roughly 3 to 4 seconds before impact. And I saw it. On the left side of the frame, partially visible at the edge of the dashcam's field of view, in the westbound lane of Friendly Avenue, there is a vehicle, not the Charger, a different vehicle. A silver sedan that had been traveling westbound on Friendly and had stopped at the light. The silver sedan had stopped, which means the light on Friendly was red, which means Webb blew through traffic, stopped at a red light before he hit me. That sedan was a witness, a vehicle witness. But more than that, when I zoomed in on that portion of the frame by frame, I could see the sedan. I could see that it was stopped. And in the upper right corner of that portion of the frame, barely visible, was the traffic signal head for westbound Friendly Avenue. It was red. You could see it. Small, partially occluded, but red. I had been submitting footage to my insurance company for 3 weeks, and neither I nor anyone at Craig Hooper's office had ever looked at that corner of the frame. Because they weren't looking for evidence. They were looking for reasons to maintain the status quo. I backed up the footage and I watched it again and again. I took a screenshot and I brought it into an image editing program and I zoomed in further and I boosted the contrast. Red light, westbound Friendly Avenue, clear as day when you knew where to look. I also noticed something else. The GPS data embedded in the dashcam file, the metadata, included a speed log for both my vehicle and, through cross-reference with the timestamp, the intersection's recorded traffic pattern. I didn't fully understand this feature when I bought the dashcam. The Garmin 67W logs not just your speed, but uses GPS coordinates to timestamp your position relative to known intersections. And those GPS coordinates, when submitted to the right analysis, could confirm my speed, my position, and the timing of when I entered the intersection relative to the signal cycle. In other words, the data could prove not just that my light was green, but when it had turned green, and how long it had been green when I entered the intersection. I sat back in my chair. I had been sitting on a time bomb, and I hadn't known it. I called 3 attorneys that afternoon. His name was David Kerr. He's been practicing personal injury and insurance bad faith law in North Carolina for 21 years. His office is on West Market Street downtown. Not a flashy office, not the kind you see in the bus shelter ads with the smiling guy and the money-back guarantee. A working office, bookshelves, case files. A paralegal named Sandra, who'd been with him for 14 years and answered the phone like she'd heard every possible story. I sat across from David Kerr at 4:30 p.m. on a Tuesday, and I put my legal pad and my laptop on his desk, and I said, "Tell me if I have something here or if I'm wasting your time." He looked at me for a moment, then he looked at the legal pad. Then he said, "Walk me through it." I've thought about that meeting a lot, because David Kerr has a specific quality that I think good attorneys have and bad attorneys lack. He listens like he's building something. He's not waiting for his turn to talk. He's assembling. Every piece of information I gave him, I could see him placing it, rotating it, figuring out where it fit. When I got to the dashcam footage and the detail in the corner of the frame, the silver sedan, the red light, he put down his pen. He said, "Show me." I showed him. I pulled up the frame-by-frame sequence, the zoomed screenshot, the contrast-enhanced still. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "And your company has had this footage for how long?" I said, 23 days. He said, "And they've indicated they reviewed it?" I said, "They said the footage was subject to interpretive ambiguity." He looked at me with an expression that I can only describe as professionally controlled disgust. Then he said, "Gary, I want to be straightforward with you. You have a vehicle liability claim against Midstate Auto. You also potentially have an insurance bad faith claim against your own company. Those are two different things. Do you understand the difference?" I said I had some idea, but I wanted him to explain it. He said, "The liability claim is about who caused the accident and who owes you money for the damage. Midstate insures the at-fault driver, and based on what you've shown me, their denial is built on sand. The bad faith claim is different. That's a claim that your own insurance company failed to investigate and handle your claim in good faith. In North Carolina, insurance bad faith claims carry specific statutory remedies, including the possibility of compensatory and punitive damages." I said, "Are you telling me I can sue my own insurance company?" He said, "I'm telling you that depending on what we find in discovery, you may have very strong grounds to do so. But let's start with the liability claim and the third-party bad faith against Midstate, and we'll see where the evidence takes us." He slid a retainer agreement across the desk. I signed it that afternoon. David moved fast. Within 72 hours of retaining him, he had sent formal letters of representation to both State Coverage Group and Midstate Auto Insurance, copies to claims departments, legal departments, and executive offices, certified mail, return receipt requested. He also filed a formal records request, a preservation notice, requiring both companies to retain all communications, emails, notes, claim files, adjuster records, and internal correspondence related to my claim. This is a critical legal step that a lot of people don't know about. Once you put a company on formal notice to preserve records, the destruction of those records becomes spoliation, which in litigation can be devastating to the destroying party. He also hired a digital forensics consultant to conduct a professional analysis of the dashcam footage, not just the video file, but the embedded GPS metadata. This person, a woman named Dr. Patricia Owens, who specializes in accident reconstruction and digital evidence, produced a 12-page report within 10 days. The conclusions were unambiguous. My vehicle was traveling 34 miles per hour northbound on Elm Street. I entered the intersection 6.2 seconds after the signal had turned green for northbound traffic. The signal cycle for Friendly Avenue had been red for approximately 4.1 seconds when Webb's Charger entered the intersection. The silver sedan visible in the dashcam footage was confirmed to be stopped at the westbound red light, consistent with normal signal compliance behavior. The traffic signal visible in the enhanced footage was confirmed red for westbound Friendly Avenue. Marcus Webb had run a red light that had been red for over 4 seconds at 58 miles per hour, with a stopped vehicle already visible in his lane. This was not ambiguous. This was not interpretive. This was documented, time-stamped, GPS-verified, forensically analyzed fact. David sent Dr. Owens's report to both insurance companies on day 35. What happened next was interesting. From Midstate Auto, the at-fault drivers company, we heard nothing for 4 days. This is normal. You don't show your reaction. From State Coverage Group, my company, Craig Hooper's employer, we heard something I did not expect. Craig Hooper called me directly, not my attorney, me. This is somewhat unusual once you've retained counsel, and David would later address it, but I took the call. Craig's voice was different. The professional smoothness was still there, but underneath it was something slightly strained, like a man reading from a script, while the script is catching fire. He said they wanted to expedite my claim. He said they recognized there had been delays in the process, and they apologized for that. He said they were prepared to revise their property damage valuation upward. I said, Craig, all communication should go through my attorney, David Kerr. He said he understood, and he had David's contact information, and he just wanted me to know they were working to make this right. I said, I appreciate that. Then I called David immediately and told him about the call. David said very calmly, "That's a good sign." I said, "What does it mean?" He said, "It means they read the forensics report." The third, the teenager, a 17-year-old named Jason Colt, had given a brief statement and then apparently disappeared. Officer Rivers had noted his name and a cell phone number that turned out to be disconnected. David spent 2 weeks finding Jason Colt. He found him through his high school. He was a student at a Greensboro high school, about a mile from the accident site. David sent a formal witness contact request through the school. The family retained a local attorney briefly to review the situation, and eventually, Jason Colt and there were 3 witnesses from the Walgreens parking lot. David tracked them all down. The first, a woman named Beverly Harkins, 58, had given a statement to police that night, indicating she saw a vehicle. She described it as a dark sedan, which was close to the Charger's color, enter the intersection very fast from the west. She hadn't been certain about the signal status, but said she was pretty sure it wasn't green for that direction. The second, a man named Terrell Washington, 44, had been walking to his car. His original statement was more neutral. He said the accident happened very suddenly, and he couldn't be sure about the signals. Mother sat down with David. What Jason said changed Terrell Washington's neutral statement into something much more significant. Jason said that when he gave his statement the night of the accident, a man had approached him before Officer Rivers got to him. A man Jason described as being in his late 20s or early 30s, wearing a dark jacket, and had spoken to him for about 2 minutes. Jason said the man told him the truck had run the red light and asked if Jason had seen it clearly. Jason said he'd told the man he wasn't sure. The man said something like, "Yeah, it happened so fast, hard to tell, right?" and then walked away. That man, based on the timing and the description, was almost certainly someone connected to Marcus Webb. possibly a friend who had arrived at the scene. The interaction with Jason Colt had been brief and hadn't succeeded in changing his statement. Jason had simply told police he wasn't sure what he'd seen, but the attempt had been made. When Jason Colt was given the opportunity to review the dashcam footage, specifically the GPS-enhanced analysis with the signal status clearly indicated, he looked at it carefully and said, "Yeah, that's what I saw. The light was red for the street he came from. I saw it." He was willing to provide a formal statement. Terrell Washington, once he understood the full picture, was also willing to clarify his original statement. He said he had been uncertain in the immediate aftermath, but that in retrospect, he was confident the cross-street traffic had been on a red light when the charger came through. Meanwhile, and this is the part I didn't plan, the part that took on a life of its own, someone posted something online. I don't know exactly who or exactly when. What I do know is that approximately on day 37, David called me and said that my dashcam footage was circulating on social media. Someone, David suspected a person connected to one of the emergency responders who had been at the scene, had obtained or been shown the footage and had uploaded a clip to a traffic safety advocacy group on Facebook with the caption, "Insurance company denying this man's claim, even though dashcam shows the other driver ran a red light for 4 seconds. Greensboro, North Carolina. Share if you think this is wrong." By the time David told me about it, the post had been shared over 12,000 times. By the next morning, it had been shared over 40,000 times. By the end of day 38, local news had picked it up. A producer from a Greensboro television station called David's office asking for comment. David was measured and professional and said only that the matter was in active legal proceedings and that the evidence clearly supported our client's account. Mid-State Auto Insurance, for the first time, issued a statement, a brief, carefully worded statement through their public relations department saying they were actively reviewing new information related to the claim and were committed to a fair resolution. Actively reviewing new information. On day 38. The accident had been on day 1. David said something to me on the phone that evening that I've thought about many times since. He said, "Gary, I want to manage your expectations about what happens next. This is a good development, but I don't want you thinking the public attention is what's going to win your case. The case is going to win the case. The footage, the forensics, the witnesses, that's what wins. The public attention is just making sure they can't make this disappear quietly." I said I understood. He said, "Do you? Because in the next 48 to 72 hours, you're going to get a phone call with a settlement offer, and I need you to not say a single word about it to anyone except me." I said, "How do you know there's going to be an offer?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Because they're not stupid." The call came on day 40. Not to me, to David. Mid-State Auto's legal department reached out requesting a call. David took it, with his paralegal Sandra on the line taking notes. The Mid-State attorney, a man named Philip Astor, opened with what David later described as the corporate version of an olive branch. He acknowledged that they were in receipt of the forensic analysis of the dashcam footage. He acknowledged that new witness statements had been provided. He said Mid-State was prepared to revisit the liability determination. David said, "Define revisit." Astor said they were prepared to accept liability on behalf of their insured. David said, "Full liability." Astor said, we would entertain a discussion on that basis. David said, Philip, I want to be clear about what we're discussing. My client has a property damage claim, a personal injury claim, out-of-pocket expenses, including towing, storage, and rental, totaling just under $4,000, ongoing physical therapy costs, documented lost wages, and potential future medical treatment for the shoulder injury. Additionally, we are evaluating a first-party bad faith claim against his own carrier, which carries its own damages exposure. I want to make sure Midstate understands the full scope of what we're talking about before we sit down. There was a pause on Asta's end. Then he said, I think we can have a productive conversation. I want to pause here and explain something that I think is really important for anyone watching this who might someday find themselves in a similar situation. The reason David led with the bad faith claim against my own carrier, State Coverage Group, is sophisticated, and it's worth understanding. In insurance litigation, one of the most powerful dynamics is when the plaintiff's own carrier and the at-fault driver's carrier have adverse interests. My company, State Coverage Group, had a contractual obligation to advocate for me. If it came out in discovery, and David believed it would, that State Coverage had received my dashcam footage and deliberately failed to conduct a thorough analysis of it, that's not just negligence. In North Carolina, insurance bad faith has specific legal remedies, and if State Coverage had been slow-walking my claim while Midstate denied it, creating a situation where I bore financial harm that both companies were contributing to. That's a potentially significant exposure for State Coverage. In other words, David was essentially negotiating against two companies simultaneously, and both of them knew it. The negotiation took 4 days. I'm not going to give you every detail because some of it remains confidential under the terms of the settlement, but I'm going to tell you the shape of what happened. Midstate accepted full liability. That was non-negotiable, and we got it on day 42. The property damage on the truck was resolved at replacement value, not the $22,400 Craig Hooper had offered me, the full replacement cost for a comparable vehicle, the personal injury claim, the medical bills, the physical therapy, the documented lost wages. Those were resolved. The out-of-pocket expenses, towing, storage, rental were resolved. And there was a component of the settlement related to the bad faith handling of the claim by State Coverage Group that I am not permitted to discuss in specific dollar terms. What I will tell you is this. When the final settlement documents landed in David Kerr's office on day 47, I was made financially whole. Completely. Every dollar I had spent, every dollar I had lost, every dollar of the truck's replacement value, it was there, plus more. I drove to David's office on day 47. Sandra made coffee. David slid the documents across the desk, and I read them. All of them. Every page, because David had spent 3 sessions with me in the preceding weeks, making sure I understood exactly what I was signing. And then I picked up the pen. And I hesitated, just for a second. Not because I was uncertain, but because I wanted to feel the weight of it. 47 days. The phone calls that went nowhere. The denial letter. Craig Hooper's smooth, bored voice telling me about interpretive ambiguity. The nights at the kitchen table. My son asking if I was okay. Denise leaving tea on my desk at midnight. The tow yard fees and the rental bills and the shoulder that still aches when it rains. All of it, balanced against 17 seconds of dashcam footage and an SD card I almost didn't think to grab from a damaged truck on the night of October 14th. I signed. David shook my hand. He said, "Well done, Gary." I said, "I didn't do much. I just didn't give up." He said, "That's usually the whole game." I sat in my car in the parking lot of David's office building for about 15 minutes. I called Denise. I told her it was done. She was quiet for a moment, and then she made a sound, a very small sound, like a breath she'd been holding for 7 weeks. And she said, "Okay, okay, good." I said, "I'm going to buy a truck." She said, "I know. You're probably wondering about Marcus Webb." Marcus Webb's claim with Mid-State, his own claim for damage to his Charger, was processed separately. I don't have full visibility into it. What I do know is that Marcus Webb's insurance history became relevant to those proceedings, and his statement to police, which directly contradicted the forensic evidence, became part of the legal record. I have no personal animosity toward Marcus Webb. I want to say that clearly. He made a terrible decision at 58 miles per hour. He ran a red light and destroyed my truck and hurt my shoulder and disrupted my family's life for 2 months. That was wrong. But people make terrible decisions. What I have considerably less tolerance for is the systematic decision, the institutional decision to exploit that situation by denying a legitimate claim, making a man pay out of pocket for an accident he didn't cause, and betting that he'd eventually get tired and go away. That institutional decision is what I want to talk about for a moment. Craig Hooper, as far as I know, is still adjusting claims somewhere. I hold no specific animus toward Craig personally. Craig was doing what his company trained him to do and rewarded him for doing. The problem isn't Craig Hooper. The problem is the incentive structure that creates Craig Hoopers. State Coverage Group, as part of the settlement resolution, agreed to a re-examination of my original claim file. I can't tell you what that examination found in specific terms. What I can tell you is that my original claim, before David Kerr was involved, was handled in ways that David described to me as consistent with patterns we see frequently in bad faith litigation. The pattern looks like this: delay the investigation, cite interpretive ambiguity with submitted evidence, wait for the other carrier to deny first, see if the claimant accepts the denial or gives up on the third-party claim. If they push back, offer a settlement on the vehicle at below market value. Most people take it. Most people. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a financial expert. I'm an HVAC installer from Greensboro, North Carolina, who had a Dashcam and got lucky in a specific way. But I've spent the last several months thinking about what I would tell someone who was at the beginning of this process, standing at that kitchen table with the denial letter in their hands. And here's what I'd say. First, get a Dashcam. Get one now. I know this sounds like the obvious lesson, and it is, but I want to be specific about why. The Dashcam didn't just record the accident. It recorded the timestamp, the GPS coordinates, and the embedded metadata that a forensic analyst could use to reconstruct the signal timing. A basic phone video wouldn't have done that. The specific file format from the Garmin unit, with its embedded GPS data stream, was essential to Dr. Owens's analysis. Not all dashcams are created equal. Get one with GPS logging. Mount it properly. Know how to retrieve the SD card quickly. The SD card I grabbed from my truck on the night of October 14th, within 20 minutes of a serious accident, while I had a possible concussion. That instinct came from having installed the Dashcam myself, knowing exactly where it was, knowing it was running, and having the presence of mind to secure the evidence before anything else. Second, document everything immediately. Every call, every email, every text, every denial letter, every adjuster's name, and the timestamp of every conversation. I kept a legal pad. Write down what was said, by whom, and when. This documentation became part of David's evidence package in the negotiation. The timestamps on my sent emails, the absence of response, the gap between when I submitted footage and when Hooper claimed to have reviewed it, all of that matters. Third, never accept the first denial. A denial is not the end of the process. It is the beginning of a negotiation. Insurance companies routinely deny legitimate claims, knowing that a significant percentage of claimants won't push back. The denial letter is, in many cases, a bet. Don't let them win the bet. Fourth, understand that your own insurance company is not purely on your side. I know that sounds cynical. They're the people you pay. They're supposed to protect you. And in some cases, with some companies and some adjusters, they do. But in my case, state coverage group's behavior was not consistent with genuine advocacy on my behalf. They delayed. They minimized the evidence I submitted. They failed to proactively obtain the police report. Whether that was calculated bad faith or bureaucratic ineptitude, the effect was the same. I was being failed by the people I was paying to protect me. Know your policy. Know what your company is required to do under your state's insurance regulations. North Carolina, like many states, has specific statutes governing claims, handling timelines, and bad faith. Your state may too. Look them up. Fifth, get an attorney before you need one. I waited 28 days. I should have called David Kerr on day 7. An initial consultation with a personal injury or insurance attorney typically costs nothing. Most work on contingency in personal injury cases, meaning they don't get paid unless you do. I was hesitant because I thought I could handle it myself, because I thought the facts were obvious, because I thought reasonable people would look at the evidence and do the right thing. I was wrong about that, and it cost me 28 days and a significant amount of stress that I didn't need to have. Sixth, and this is the one I think about most, don't let them make you feel small. The language they use, the process they run you through, the hold times and the claim numbers, and the adjusters who speak in complete sentences and make you feel like you've wandered into a system too complex for a regular person to navigate. That's designed. All of it is designed to create a power imbalance, to make you feel like you're the petitioner and they're the authority. You are not the petitioner. You are the customer. You are the plaintiff. You are the person who paid premiums for 16 years and has the evidence and the witnesses and the police report and the forensic analysis and the legal right to be made whole. Don't let them forget that, and don't let yourself forget it either. I drive a 2023 GMC Sierra now. Deep blue, extended cab. I installed a new dashcam before I drove it off the lot. A better one this time, forward and rear facing, GPS logging, cloud backup. Buck the golden retriever has already destroyed one of the tie-down straps in the bed. My son thinks it's a pretty good truck. He's not going to say that out loud, obviously, but I can tell. My shoulder still aches when it rains, but I'm okay. If you're sitting somewhere right now with a denial letter in your hands or on your screen, and you're wondering if it's worth fighting, and you're tired, and you're looking at the bill stack, I want you to hear this. It's worth fighting. The evidence matters. The truth matters. And sometimes a card the size of your thumbnail in the right pocket at the right moment is all the difference in the world. Get a dash cam, keep fighting, and never let them make you small. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the channel to catch new real-life stories related to insurance and accidents every Tuesday and Friday. Don't forget to like and share with your friends.